To tell you who I am or who I thought I was. And I almost didn't even start this story because I spent most of my life being told it wasn't worth telling. My brother always said that, not in a cruel way at first, just in the way older siblings sometimes flatten you without noticing. He'd be talking about our family, our dad's side, the Tremblay name, what it meant in our small town outside of Sudbury, and I'd be standing right there, and somehow I'd feel invisible, like I was adjacent to the story, never actually in it. I was 28 when I found out why. I should back up. I grew up the youngest of two. My brother was 6 years older, and he had our dad's build, our dad's laugh, the dark eyes that showed up in every photo on the mantle going back 3 generations. I had none of that. I had lighter hair, a narrower jaw, this gap between my front teeth that nobody else in the family shared. My mom used to say I took after a great aunt on her side. Nobody questioned it. I didn't question it. You don't, when you're a kid. You believe what you're told because what else are you supposed to do? My dad passed when I was 19. Heart attack, fast, no warning. My mom held things together the way she always did, quietly, completely, like a woman who had been bracing for loss her whole life. My brother stepped into the head of family role immediately. He was 25, already working in finance in Toronto, already the kind of person who used the word legacy without irony. When my dad died, there was a will. I didn't think much about it at the time because there wasn't much to divide. The house in Sudbury, some savings, a small life insurance policy. It all went to my mom, which made sense. She was still living. I was in college. My brother was doing fine. Nobody fought. Nobody said anything strange. It wasn't until my mom got sick 4 years ago, early onset Parkinson's, the kind that moves faster than the doctors expect, that things started to shift. She needed full-time care within about 18 months of the diagnosis. My brother and I agreed to sell the house and use the proceeds to pay for a private care facility. He handled the sale. He handled the finances. He was the executor of my dad's estate and had been managing the family finances for years by that point, so it made sense. I trusted him. I had a nursing job at a hospital in Ottawa by then. I was busy. I wasn't watching closely enough. I noticed things in pieces. A comment here, a number there. He mentioned the house sold for less than I expected. But I didn't know the Sudbury market. He mentioned some old debts of our dad's had to be settled first. I nodded along. He was the one with the finance degree. Then one evening, about 2 years ago, I was visiting my mom at the care home, and she had a rare clear moment. She held my hand and she looked at me for a long time, the way she used to before the disease made her eyes go somewhere else, and she said quietly, "I always meant to tell you. I just kept waiting for the right time." I asked her what she meant. She shook her head slowly. "Your brother knows. He's known since your father's last year." Then someone came in to give her medication, and the moment passed, she drifted. I sat there for another hour, but she didn't come back to it. When I asked her about it the next day, she looked at me like she didn't remember saying it at all. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. I told myself it could mean anything. Medical paperwork, a financial decision they'd never told me about, something embarrassing, something minor. I ran through 100 explanations that were all smaller than the feeling I had. The feeling I had was, something is wrong with the story I've been told about myself. The DNA test wasn't even about me at first. I work in a medical ward, not a lab, but I know the people who work in the lab. We're a small enough hospital that you learn each other's names, you eat lunch together sometimes, you know who's going through a difficult case. A colleague of mine, she runs the genetics unit, came to me one afternoon looking shaken. She had a patient, an older woman, who had submitted a consumer DNA kit result and requested a consult because the results had flagged something unexpected. The woman had a rare inherited condition showing up in a second-degree match, and she wanted to understand what it meant for her living relatives. My colleague was asking if I knew anyone in my family with a history of a specific cardiac arrhythmia. It was the kind she'd seen in the woman's file. My dad died of a heart attack. I said yes. She said that was likely just a coincidence. Statistically speaking, different cause. But something about the conversation unsettled me. Afterward, I stood in the break room for a while thinking about genetics and inheritance and all the things we carry without knowing we carry them. That night, I ordered a kit online. I told myself I was just curious. I told myself it was the nurse in me, the need to have information, the discomfort with blanks. I mailed it off, and then I went back to my regular life, and I mostly didn't think about it. 6 weeks later, I got an email saying my results were ready. I opened the app sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage because I didn't want to be in public if anything felt strange. The ethnicity results loaded first. A lot of French Canadian, which made sense. Some British Isles. A small percentage of Indigenous ancestry that surprised me, but also felt like a piece I hadn't known was missing. Fine. Normal enough. Then I looked at the DNA matches. The closest match listed was not my brother. There was a woman at the top of the list. A stranger. The app estimated the relationship as close family, possible half-sibling or first-degree relative. Her profile name was M.W. Her profile was mostly private, just a location listed as Gatineau, Quebec, and one sentence in her bio. Searching for a daughter, born March 1996 in Ottawa. I was born in March 1996 in Ottawa. I sat in that parking garage for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't do anything. I just sat there reading that sentence over and over again the way you read something that doesn't make sense yet, when your brain keeps running it through looking for a different meaning. I messaged her through the app. I kept it short. I said I thought we might be related and asked if she'd be open to talking. She responded in 11 minutes. Her name was Vivienne. She was 53 years old. She told me in a message that was clearly written carefully that she had given birth to a daughter at the Ottawa Civic Hospital on March 14, 1996, that her daughter had been placed for adoption through a private arrangement, that she had been told the adoption was fully closed and that contact was not possible, that she had submitted her DNA in desperation after years of searching through official channels that led nowhere. She asked me one question. Is your birthday March 14th? It is. We spoke on the phone that same night. She had a low, careful voice, the kind that sounds like someone who has learned to hold themselves very still. She asked me about my life, and I told her. The nursing, Ottawa, my mom's illness, my brother. She listened without interrupting. Then she told me her side. She had been 25 when she got pregnant. She was not in a position to raise a child alone. Her words. The father was not in the picture. She had looked into adoption and had connected with a private facilitator, a man who arranged closed adoptions for families who wanted children and birth mothers who needed a discreet option. She had met the couple who would take the baby once, briefly. She described them as warm, stable French-Canadian. She signed papers. She went home. What she didn't know, what she didn't find out until years later, was that the man who facilitated the adoption had also handled the family's estate planning. He was both an adoption facilitator and a notary. In Quebec and Ontario, both. And he had maintained contact with the adoptive family in ways she hadn't been told about. She hired a lawyer when her daughter would have been about 8. The lawyer found a wall. Closed adoption. Sealed records. No path forward without the adoptee's consent. And the adoptee was a minor. She waited. She said that word like it cost her something. Waited. When I asked what made her do the DNA test now, after all this time, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Someone told me last year that the family had experienced some financial difficulties, that the estate had been settled in a way that wasn't entirely clear. I wanted to know if my daughter, if you, were all right." I asked her what she meant by financial difficulties. She told me that the notary who had facilitated my adoption, a man named Mr. Fontaine, had died 2 years ago, and that after his death a review of his files had uncovered some irregularities in several of the estates he'd managed, including, apparently, one belonging to a family in Sudbury. My family. I called my brother the next morning. I didn't lead with the DNA test. I asked him carefully about Mr. Fontaine. Just the name? Dropped into the middle of an ordinary question about the estate. The pause before he answered was about 3 seconds too long. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I said the name again. I said I'd been doing some research into Dad's estate, just trying to understand the finances, and the name had come up. He said Mr. Fontaine was just a notary Dad had used years ago. He said there was nothing unusual about it. He said I was being paranoid. I told him I'd taken a DNA test. Another pause. Longer this time. Okay, he said finally. Just that. Okay. I told him I had a match. A close match. Someone who said she was my biological mother. He said, I think we should talk in person. We met at a coffee shop in Toronto 2 weeks later. He drove down from the financial district and I took the train from Ottawa, and we sat across from each other at a table near the window, and I could see in his face that he'd been dreading this for a long time. He didn't deny it. He told me that our father had known since before Dad died. Dad had been the one to arrange the adoption, quietly through Mr. Fontaine, without telling Mom until I was already home. By the time Mom knew, I was already hers. She chose not to tell me. They agreed together, and then Dad died before he could reconsider, and the secret calcified. My brother found out when he was going through Dad's papers after the funeral. He found the original adoption agreement. He found the notary's contact information. He found a document he wouldn't describe to me in detail, just said it was related to a financial arrangement connected to my placement. I asked him what that meant. He looked out the window. I asked again. He said that Mr. Fontaine had also been managing a trust, a small one set up by Vivienne's family, her parents, my biological grandparents at the time of the adoption. The kind of thing that was apparently not uncommon in private adoptions, where the birth family had means and wanted to ensure the child's future. The trust was meant to be accessible to me when I turned 25. I turned 25 3 years ago. My brother had known about the trust since he was 25 himself. He had known for over a decade. He had, through Mr. Fontaine, while the man was still alive, accessed and redirected the trust before I ever knew it existed. The estate irregularities that came up after Fontaine's death, that was part of what was being reviewed. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once. He said he'd convinced himself I'd never find out, and then he said he'd convinced himself it didn't matter because I had a good life, I had a career, I didn't need it. He said a lot of things that were true in pieces and completely false as a whole. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there and felt the shape of my entire life rearrange itself around this information. I paid for my own coffee. I got back on the train. A friend of mine from the hospital connected me with a lawyer who handles estate disputes. We met in her office in Ottawa on a grey Tuesday in November, and I brought everything I had, the DNA results, the screenshots of my conversation with Vivienne, the name Fontaine, the dates. The lawyer, a composed woman in her 40s who had clearly heard stranger things, listened carefully and took notes. She told me that the trusts, depending on how it had been structured and what province governed it, might still be recoverable, especially given Fontaine's death had triggered a review of his files. She told me the process would take time. She told me my brother's liability was real but complicated. She also told me that I had rights as an adult adoptee under Ontario law to request my original birth registration and adoption order. That I could do that independently. That I should. I filed the request the next week. The documents came back within 60 days. I sat at my kitchen table in Ottawa and opened the envelope slowly. The way you open something when you already know it will change you. My original name, the name Vivienne had given me before the adoption, was Elise. I looked at it for a long time. I didn't feel like an Elise. I had been myself my whole life. But there was something about seeing it, about knowing that I had been named, that I had been someone before I became someone else. It mattered in a way I hadn't expected. Vivienne and I met for the first time in person in December. We chose a cafe in Gatineau, halfway between her home and the train station. I got there early and sat by the window with a coffee I didn't drink. She was taller than I expected. She had lighter hair than mine, gray coming in at the temples, and she walked in a way that reminded me immediately of myself. Head slightly tilted, always scanning a room. I'd never had that with anyone before. The sensation of recognizing yourself in another person. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her life. She was a translator, worked mostly for federal government clients, had never married, had 2 cats, spent her weekends hiking in Gatineau Park. She had looked for me longer than she hadn't. She cried once, briefly, and apologized, and I told her not to. I don't know what we are to each other yet. That's the honest answer. She's not a replacement for the woman who raised me, who is still in her care home in Sudbury, who still has good days where she knows my name. But she is something. A door that was sealed for 28 years and is now open. The legal process is ongoing. The trust funds are partially recoverable, my lawyer says. Enough to matter, not everything. My brother and I have not spoken since Toronto, though he sent a message through his own lawyer acknowledging liability in the matter. I chose not to press criminal charges for reasons that are still mine to make sense of. Fontaine is dead and can't be held accountable. Some doors closed when he died, but some doors opened. I know who I am now, in a way I didn't know how to articulate before. Not because of the name on a document or the money in a trust or the DNA percentage on an app. Because I sat across from a woman in a cafe in Gatineau in December and she looked at me the way I'd been waiting my whole life to be seen, like I was fully present, fully real, fully someone she had always been looking for. She had kept one thing from the adoption, a detail Fontaine had passed along without being asked. He had told her I had a small birthmark on the inside of my left wrist, the shape of something she couldn't quite identify. She reached across the table that day and held my wrist in both of her hands. I used to think it looked like a bird, she said. I looked down at it. This small mark I'd had my whole life and never thought twice about. I thought it looked like a leaf, I said. She smiled. It was my smile. Maybe it's both, she said. I keep coming back to the moment my brother said okay on the phone. Just that one word and I knew. Not because it was an admission, he hadn't admitted anything yet, but because of how hollow it sounded, like a door closing on something he'd been hoping would never arrive. That's the thing about hiding the truth from someone. You can do it for years. You can convince yourself you're protecting them, or protecting yourself, or that the truth has an expiry date and eventually it won't matter anymore. But it doesn't work that way. The truth doesn't expire, it just waits. My brother had over a decade to come to me. He found those adoption papers when he was 25. He knew about the trust. He knew about Fontaine. He made a choice, and then he made it again every single year that passed. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern of choices, and the weight of those choices was always going to land somewhere eventually. It landed here. It landed on a grey Tuesday in a Toronto coffee shop, on a train ride home I barely remember, on a lawyer's desk with documents spread out like evidence of a life that had been quietly stolen. I don't say this to be hard on him. I say it because it's the only way I know how to make sense of what happened. Actions have consequences that travel. They don't always arrive on time, and they don't always arrive in the form you expect. But they arrive. What I've learned, and I mean learned in the way that gets into your bones, not just your head, is that integrity isn't just about the big moments, it's the 1,000 small decisions nobody's watching. My brother was never a bad person in the obvious ways. He was careful, responsible, present at every holiday. But in private, in the places where character actually forms, he chose himself, repeatedly. And the quiet accumulation of that choosing is what eventually broke something between us that I don't think time will fully fix. I also learned something harder, that knowing the truth requires courage. I didn't know I had. I almost didn't send that message to Vivienne. I sat in that parking garage for 40 minutes talking myself in and out of it. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me understood, even then, that once you pull on that thread, the whole thing unravels. It takes something, I don't have a better word for it than steadiness, to keep pulling anyway. To ask the question even when the answer scares you. To open the envelope, to get on the train to Toronto. Vivienne had that same steadiness, but she'd been carrying it for 28 years. She submitted her DNA not knowing if anything would come back. She'd already been through lawyers and closed records and silence. She kept going. That kind of persistence. The quiet, undramatic kind that doesn't make noise but doesn't stop either, is what actually changes things. Not the big gestures. The showing up again. I think about the birthmark on my wrist sometimes. I've had it my whole life and never thought about it. She'd been thinking about it for 28 years. Say Mark. Two completely different relationships to it. That's what secrets do. They create this strange asymmetry where one person carries something the other person doesn't even know exists. I know now. And knowing even when it's painful, even when it costs something, it's better. It has to be.